The most dangerous lies are the ones everyone already believes. On a cool Thursday evening in downtown Richmond, Virginia, the last rays of sunlight reflected off glass office towers and parked cars lined along Broad Street. People hurried home with paper coffee cups in their hands, their minds focused on dinner plans, evening news broadcasts, and the ordinary rhythm of everyday life. No one expected that within a few minutes, the entire city would witness a moment that would divide public opinion and ignite a storm of rumors. Marcus Reed walked calmly along the sidewalk, his hands tucked into the pockets of a dark gray jacket. At 34 years old, Marcus carried himself with quiet confidence. He owned a small auto repair business on the south side of town and was known by neighbors as the kind of man who fixed problems without asking for recognition. Earlier that afternoon, he had closed his shop a little early and spent an hour helping an elderly customer whose truck had broken down. It had been an ordinary day. At least, that was what everyone thought. A police cruiser slowly turned the corner and rolled to a stop near the curb. The flashing lights remained off, but the vehicle's presence immediately drew attention. Officer Ryan Mercer stepped out and adjusted the radio attached to his uniform. For nearly 2 decades, Ryan had been one of the most recognizable officers in the city. Local newspapers often described him as dedicated and dependable. Community leaders praised his service. Parents pointed him out during neighborhood events as an example of integrity. To many people, Ryan Mercer represented everything a police officer should be. As Ryan approached Marcus, conversations on the sidewalk began to fade. Something about the officer's expression caused nearby pedestrians to slow down. Marcus noticed him immediately but showed no sign of alarm. He simply stopped walking and turned toward the approaching officer. "Marcus Reed?" Ryan asked in a firm voice. Marcus nodded. "That's right." Ryan's gaze remained fixed on him. "I need you to come with me." Several people nearby exchanged confused glances. Marcus looked around briefly before returning his attention to Ryan. "Can you tell me why?" he asked calmly. Ryan's expression hardened. "You know exactly why." The words hung in the air. More pedestrians slowed down. A woman standing outside a pharmacy pulled out her phone. A man across the street stopped in the middle of a conversation and stared. Within seconds, attention spread through the block like a ripple moving across water. Marcus remained composed. His face revealed nothing. No anger. No panic. No desperation. Just silence. Ryan took another step forward. "We have questions that need answers." The statement sounded simple enough, but the tone behind it suggested something far more serious. Whispers began to circulate among the growing crowd. Someone claimed Marcus had been under investigation for months. Another insisted they had seen his picture online. Others started filling the gaps with their own assumptions. The human mind often prefers a rumor over uncertainty. Marcus heard the whispers. He saw the phones pointed in his direction. He understood exactly what was happening. Yet he still said nothing. What nobody knew was that Marcus had been expecting this moment. Not today specifically. Not this exact location. But the moment itself. And as the crowd grew larger and the city began forming opinions before hearing a single fact, Marcus looked directly into Officer Ryan Mercer's eyes with a calmness that seemed strangely out of place. Because while everyone else believed they were witnessing the beginning of a story, the truth was that this story had started a long time ago. The crowd on Broad Street seemed to double within minutes. People who had been rushing home now lingered near storefront windows and traffic lights, drawn by curiosity and the quiet tension hanging in the evening air. Smartphones appeared everywhere. Some recorded openly while others pretended not to. News of something unusual spread faster than anyone could walk. Marcus Reed stood beneath the glow of a street lamp as passing cars slowed to catch a glimpse of what was happening. Officer Ryan Mercer remained calm and controlled, the picture of professionalism that the city had come to trust. To anyone watching from a distance, the scene appeared simple. A respected officer was questioning a suspicious man. Most people never looked beyond first impressions. Marcus noticed familiar faces in the crowd. A woman who occasionally brought her sedan to his repair shop. A delivery driver who stopped for coffee every morning across the street. Even a former customer standing near a bus stop stared at him with uncertainty. Their expressions hurt more than open accusations. Doubt was spreading through the crowd, one person at a time. Ryan spoke quietly into his radio before returning his attention to Marcus. The officer never raised his voice. He did not need to. His reputation spoke for him. Every measured word seemed to reinforce the belief that he already knew something everyone else did not. Around them, whispers continued to grow. Someone claimed Marcus had been connected to a financial investigation. Another insisted there had been complaints against his business. None of it was verified. None of it mattered. Rumors have a way of becoming facts when enough people repeat them. Marcus felt dozens of eyes studying him. Yet his expression never changed. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. He simply listened. That silence confused people. Some interpreted it as guilt. Others saw something different, a strange confidence that seemed completely out of place. A local blogger arrived carrying a camera bag over his shoulder. He immediately began filming from the edge of the crowd. Across the street, a reporter from a neighborhood news station spotted the gathering and called her producer. Within minutes, information began moving through social media. Grainy videos appeared online. Captions filled with speculation spread across local forums. The city was already writing its own version of the story. Ryan glanced toward the growing audience and then back at Marcus. "This would be much easier if you cooperated," he said. Marcus looked directly at him. "I have cooperated." The response was calm and respectful. Nothing more. Nothing less. For a brief second, Ryan seemed surprised. Then his expression returned to its familiar certainty. The evening breeze carried the distant sound of sirens. Somewhere across downtown, store signs flickered on as daylight faded. The city continued moving around them, unaware that a much larger story was quietly unfolding beneath the surface. What nobody in that crowd understood was that Marcus had spent months preparing for a moment exactly like this. While strangers formed opinions and cameras captured only fragments of the truth, he was watching something else entirely. He was watching Ryan Mercer. And for the first time that evening, Marcus noticed a detail that made him certain of one thing. Ryan looked confident. But confidence and certainty were not the same thing. By the time darkness settled over Richmond, the story had already escaped the boundaries of Broad Street. Local news websites carried blurry screenshots. Social media feeds filled with opinions from people who had never met Marcus Reed and knew nothing about his life. Yet certainty spread faster than truth ever could. Inside a downtown police administration building a few blocks away, television screens glowed against polished walls as reporters discussed the developing situation. Most of them repeated the same narrative. A respected officer. A suspicious civilian. An ongoing investigation. The details remained vague, but that did not stop speculation. Ryan Mercer stood near a conference room window overlooking the city skyline. The lights of passing traffic stretched like rivers beneath the night sky. Several colleagues offered words of support as they walked past him. Some patted him on the shoulder. Others assured him that the public trusted his judgment. Ryan thanked them with measured smiles. On the surface, he appeared completely at ease. Across town, Marcus sat alone in a quiet interview room illuminated by a single overhead light. The room was clean, professional, and calm. No raised voices echoed through the halls. No dramatic confrontations occurred. Yet the atmosphere carried a different kind of pressure. A pressure created by uncertainty. Marcus folded his hands on the table and listened as distant footsteps moved through the corridor outside. Every few minutes an officer glanced through the small glass window in the door. Most looked away quickly when they realized Marcus was already watching them. The strange thing was that Marcus did not seem worried. If anything, he appeared patient. Hours passed. Reporters continued building their stories. Online commentators filled in missing facts with assumptions. Some questioned Marcus's business. Others speculated about financial misconduct. None of the claims were supported by evidence, but repetition gave them weight. Meanwhile, a young investigative journalist named Emily Harper sat at her apartment desk reviewing footage from Broad Street. She had covered city government and law enforcement for nearly 7 years. Something about the videos bothered her. It was not what she saw. It was what she did not see. The recordings captured Ryan approaching Marcus. They captured the crowd gathering. They captured pieces of the conversation. Yet every clip seemed to begin after something important had already happened. Emily replayed the footage again. Then again. A detail near the edge of one video caught her attention. A man standing beside a newspaper kiosk appeared to be filming before Ryan ever exited his vehicle. Emily paused the frame. Why would someone start recording before the encounter even began? The question lingered in her mind. Back at the administration building, Ryan received a phone call. The moment he saw the number, his expression shifted ever so slightly. It lasted less than a second, but it was enough. He stepped into an empty office and closed the door behind him. No one heard the conversation. No one knew what was said. But when he emerged several minutes later, the confidence he had displayed all evening seemed just a little less certain. At that exact moment, Marcus sat quietly in the interview room and glanced toward the clock on the wall. Then, for the first time that night, a faint smile appeared on his face. Not because he was winning. Not because he felt safe. But because somewhere beyond the rumors, beyond the headlines, and beyond the carefully constructed narrative, the first crack had finally appeared. The following morning Richmond woke up convinced it already knew the truth. Radio hosts discussed the case during morning commutes. Coffee shop conversations drifted toward speculation. Social media posts multiplied by the hour. The city had chosen its narrative, and very few people seemed interested in questioning it. Yet beneath the surface, small inconsistencies were beginning to attract attention. Emily Harper arrived at the newsroom before sunrise carrying a notebook, a laptop, and a growing sense that something was wrong. She spent hours reviewing every available recording from Broad Street. The more footage she watched, the less confident she became in the official version of events. The timeline did not flow naturally. Certain moments appeared to be missing. Witness statements posted online contradicted one another. One person claimed Marcus had argued loudly before the encounter. Another insisted he had barely spoken at all. Neither account matched the videos. Emily enlarged one frame after another until her eyes ached. Then she noticed something unusual. The security camera mounted above a nearby bank should have captured the entire sidewalk where the encounter began. Yet every publicly released clip started several minutes later. The missing window was small, but it mattered. Sometimes the truth hides in the moments people never see. Across town, Marcus remained calm despite the storm building around him. He sat in a conference room speaking with city investigators. Their questions were professional and direct. Marcus answered carefully. He never appeared defensive. He never seemed surprised. What puzzled the investigators most was his composure. Most people under intense public scrutiny showed frustration, fear, or anger. Marcus displayed none of those emotions. It was almost as though he had anticipated every question before it was asked. Meanwhile Ryan Mercer found himself facing a different challenge. The praise and support that had surrounded him the night before remained strong, but cracks were beginning to form. A supervisor requested additional documentation related to the case. A department attorney asked for clarification regarding certain procedural details. The requests were routine, yet Ryan seemed increasingly uncomfortable each time another question appeared. He reassured everyone that the answers existed. He simply needed time to gather them. Late that afternoon, Emily received a message from an unknown sender. The account contained no name and no profile picture. Attached was a single sentence. "Check the bank camera." That was all. No explanation. No signature. Emily stared at the message for several seconds. Her pulse quickened. She immediately contacted the bank and requested access to archived footage. The process would take time, but for the first time she felt she was moving towards something real. That evening, rain clouds gathered over the city. Streetlights reflected off wet pavement as commuters hurried home. Inside the administration building, Ryan stood alone near a window overlooking downtown. He watched the rain begin to fall and loosened his tie. The confident image he presented to the public remained intact, but when his phone vibrated, he glanced at the screen and froze. It was another unknown number. The message contained only 5 words. "We know what is missing." For the first time since this story began, Ryan Mercer felt something he had not expected to feel. Not doubt. Not uncertainty. Fear. Rain continued falling across Richmond long after sunset, washing the city in reflections of red traffic lights and glowing storefront signs. While most residents followed the story through headlines and rumors, Marcus Reed sat quietly in a small room and watched events unfold exactly as he had expected. For days, people had wondered why he seemed so calm. Some assumed he had accepted defeat. Others believed he simply did not understand the seriousness of his situation. The truth was far different. Marcus understood more than anyone realized. Several years earlier, his repair shop had nearly collapsed after a fraudulent contractor disappeared owing him thousands of dollars. During that difficult period, Marcus learned a lesson that changed the way he viewed the world. Facts mattered. Records mattered. Evidence mattered. Ever since then, he had documented everything. Conversations. Transactions. Appointments. Deliveries. Security footage. He trusted records more than memories. More than opinions. More than rumors. Across town, Emily Harper sat in front of her computer waiting for a response from the bank regarding the missing camera footage. The clock on her screen moved slowly. Midnight approached. Outside her apartment window, rain tapped softly against the glass. She replayed the events again and again in her mind. Every instinct told her there was a missing piece. Then her inbox chimed. A new message had arrived. The bank had located archived footage from the evening on Broad Street. Emily immediately downloaded the file. Her heart raced as the video loaded. The timestamp showed several minutes before the encounter everyone had already seen. She leaned forward and pressed play. The camera captured Marcus walking down the sidewalk exactly as described. It showed Ryan Mercer arriving in his patrol vehicle. But then Emily noticed something unexpected. Before Ryan approached Marcus, he spent nearly 2 minutes speaking with an unidentified man standing beside the newspaper kiosk. The conversation was impossible to hear, but their body language suggested familiarity. They were not strangers. They appeared to know each other. Emily paused the footage. This detail had never appeared in any official account. She watched again. And again. Meanwhile, Ryan sat alone in his office reviewing documents. The anonymous messages continued to weigh on his mind. Every sound outside his door made him glance up. Every email notification pulled his attention away from the paperwork in front of him. Confidence had carried him through most of his career. Yet confidence becomes fragile when uncertainty enters the room. Just after midnight, another message appeared on his phone. There was no number attached. No name. Only a photograph. Ryan stared at the image and felt the color drain from his face. The picture showed the newspaper kiosk from Broad Street. It had been taken from a different angle than the public videos. More importantly, it clearly captured the unidentified man standing beside him minutes before the encounter with Marcus began. Ryan immediately locked his phone screen and looked around the empty office. For the first time, he realized someone else had been watching that night. Someone who had seen far more than the public knew. At nearly the same moment, Marcus leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. A faint smile crossed his face once more. The city still believed he was the man hiding secrets. But the truth was beginning to emerge. And when it did, everyone would discover that the biggest secret had never belonged to Marcus at all. Morning arrived beneath a blanket of gray clouds that seemed reluctant to leave Richmond. The rain had stopped, but the city still felt heavy, as if it sensed that something important was about to surface. News outlets continued discussing Marcus Reed. Comment sections remained divided. Some defended him. Others condemned him. Most simply followed whichever version of the story appeared first on their screens. But while the public argued, Emily Harper followed the evidence. She spent the entire morning tracing the identity of the man standing beside Ryan Mercer near the newspaper kiosk. The image from the bank camera was clear enough to recognize his face but not clear enough to identify him immediately. Hours passed as she searched public records, social media accounts, and archived city photographs. Then shortly after noon, she found a match. The man was named Kevin Doyle. 5 years earlier, Kevin had worked as a private contractor hired by multiple city departments. His name appeared in several procurement records before abruptly disappearing from public documents. The discovery alone was not remarkable. What caught Emily's attention was something else. Kevin Doyle had once been connected to an internal review involving missing municipal funds. The investigation had quietly ended without charges. Yet the timing seemed impossible to ignore. Across town, Ryan Mercer attended a departmental meeting that should have felt routine. Instead, every question sounded different. Every glance lingered slightly longer than before. A deputy chief requested updated reports. An attorney asked about timeline discrepancies. Another supervisor wanted clarification regarding witness statements. None of the questions accused Ryan of wrongdoing, but together they created a pressure he could no longer ignore. The room felt warmer than usual. His answers remained professional, yet he could feel confidence slipping through his fingers. Meanwhile, Marcus sat in another interview session reviewing documents with investigators. For the first time since the story began, one of them asked a different question. Not about accusations. Not about rumors. Instead, the investigator slid a photograph across the table. It showed Ryan Mercer standing beside Kevin Doyle. Marcus looked at the image for several seconds. Then he nodded slowly. The investigator leaned forward. "Do you know him?" Marcus met his eyes. "I know who he is." The answer immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. The investigator waited for more. Marcus remained silent. His patience was almost unsettling. Finally he spoke again. "The problem is not what happened on Broad Street." The investigator frowned. "Then what is the problem?" Marcus glanced toward the window. Broad Street was just the moment everything became visible. Those words lingered long after the meeting ended. That evening Emily received another anonymous message. This time it contained a single file. No explanation. No instructions. Only a date from nearly 6 years earlier. Curious, she opened it. Inside was an old city audit report that had never been publicly released. Several names were blacked out. Large portions were redacted. But one detail remained visible. Near the bottom of the page appeared 2 familiar names on the same line. Kevin Doyle. Ryan Mercer. Emily stared at the screen as her pulse quickened. The encounter on Broad Street was no longer looking like the beginning of a story. It was beginning to look like the final chapter of a story that had started years ago. The next 48 hours transformed Richmond from a city chasing rumors into a city searching for answers. Emily Harper worked almost without sleep. Empty coffee cups crowded her desk while documents, timelines, and archived records covered every available surface. The more she investigated, the more impossible it became to believe that the events on Broad Street had been random. Every trail seemed to circle back to the same small group of names. Ryan Mercer. Kevin Doyle. A handful of old city contracts. And a series of closed investigations that had quietly disappeared from public discussion years earlier. Late on Friday afternoon, Emily finally uncovered the connection that changed everything. Buried inside municipal archives was a forgotten complaint filed nearly 6 years ago by a local business owner. The complaint alleged irregularities involving city repair contracts and missing funds. Most people had ignored it at the time. The case had been dismissed for lack of evidence. The business owner who filed it had eventually moved away. But one detail immediately caught Emily's attention. The name on the complaint belonged to Marcus Reed. Across town, investigators were reaching the same conclusion. What they initially believed was a simple incident had evolved into something far larger. They began reviewing financial records, archived reports, and witness interviews connected to the older case. Patterns slowly emerged. Inconsistencies that once seemed insignificant now appeared impossible to overlook. Marcus remained cooperative throughout every interview. Yet he continued revealing information only when directly asked. It was as though he had spent years waiting for the right questions. Finally, one investigator placed a thick folder on the table and looked directly at him. "You knew this was connected to the old complaint, did not you?" Marcus nodded. "Yes." The investigator leaned forward. "Then why did you never say anything?" Marcus looked down at the folder before answering. "Because nobody wanted to listen 6 years ago." Silence filled the room. For a moment no one spoke. Then Marcus reached into his briefcase and carefully placed a small external hard drive on the table. The investigators exchanged confused glances. "What is this?" one asked. Marcus folded his hands calmly. "Everything." The room became very still. Over the next hour, investigators reviewed files stored on the device. Emails. Photographs. Transaction records. Meeting notes. Copies of documents Marcus had preserved for years. None of it proved wrongdoing by itself. But together the files painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. More importantly, they explained why Marcus had remained calm from the beginning. He had never expected public opinion to protect him. He had trusted evidence instead. At nearly the same moment, Ryan Mercer sat alone in his office staring at a ringing phone. The call came from someone he had not heard from in months. Kevin Doyle. Ryan hesitated before answering. When he finally picked up, he listened without speaking. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. When it ended, Ryan slowly lowered the phone and stared out the window toward the fading evening sunlight. For the first time, he understood the situation completely. The encounter on Broad Street had not exposed Marcus Reed. It had exposed a story that some people had spent years trying to keep buried. And now that story was beginning to surface faster than anyone could stop it. By Monday morning the story had turned upside down. The same news stations that once repeated accusations now led broadcasts with questions. The same social media accounts that had rushed to judgment suddenly demanded transparency. Richmond was no longer debating whether something had happened. The city was trying to understand how much had been hidden. Emily Harper's article was published just after sunrise. It did not accuse anyone. It did not speculate. Instead, it laid out a timeline supported by documents, archived records, and verified footage. Readers saw the forgotten complaint filed by Marcus Reed 6 years earlier. They saw the connection between Kevin Doyle and city contracts. They saw evidence that key questions had never been fully investigated. Within hours the article spread across the state. Reporters from larger outlets arrived in Richmond. Public officials who had ignored the story now requested briefings. Department leaders announced formal reviews. The atmosphere inside police headquarters changed immediately. Hallways that once echoed with confidence now felt unusually quiet. Conversations stopped when supervisors entered rooms. Officers who had publicly supported Ryan Mercer suddenly avoided interviews. Nobody wanted to be associated with a situation that seemed to grow more complicated every hour. Ryan sat at his desk staring at a stack of documents that no longer felt under his control. Every new review uncovered another inconsistency. Every new question forced investigators to look further back. The image he had spent years building was beginning to crack. Not because someone attacked it, but because facts were being examined more closely than ever before. Across town, Marcus finally stepped outside after days of interviews and meetings. The afternoon air felt cool against his face. People recognized him immediately. Some offered supportive nods. Others looked away, embarrassed by conclusions they had rushed to make. Marcus accepted neither sympathy nor praise. He simply continued walking. He understood something most people did not. Public opinion could change overnight. Truth moved much slower. Later that evening, city investigators gathered to review the full contents of the hard drive Marcus had provided. The files revealed patterns extending far beyond a single encounter on Broad Street. Records that once appeared unrelated now connected with surprising clarity. Emails matched meeting schedules. Archived reports aligned with financial documents. Witness accounts that had once seemed insignificant suddenly carried new importance. Piece by piece, the larger picture emerged. Meanwhile, Emily received one final anonymous message. Unlike the others, it contained no documents and no instructions. It contained only a sentence. "You were finally looking in the right place." She read it twice before the account disappeared permanently. Whoever had guided her investigation was gone. Yet their purpose had already been fulfilled. Near midnight, Ryan Mercer stood alone in his office for what might be the last time. The city lights shimmered beyond the window as rain clouds drifted across the skyline. He remembered how certain he had felt on Broad Street. How completely he believed he controlled the narrative. Now that certainty was gone. Across Richmond, investigators prepared reports, journalists prepared stories, and officials prepared statements. The collapse was no longer a possibility. It had already begun. The only question remaining was how much of the truth would be revealed when the final pieces finally came together. 1 week later, Richmond looked different. Not because the buildings had changed or because the traffic moved any slower through downtown streets, but because the story people believed had finally caught up with the truth. Official reviews were completed. Public statements were released. Investigators presented their findings. The forgotten complaint filed by Marcus Reed 6 years earlier was no longer buried in an archive. It had become the foundation for a broader examination of decisions, records, and relationships that should have been questioned long ago. News outlets across the state covered the outcome. Headlines that once focused on suspicion now focused on accountability. The public learned that the encounter on Broad Street had been only a small piece of a much larger picture. The missing footage, the overlooked documents, the unexplained connections, and the unanswered questions had finally been brought into the light. For many residents, the realization was uncomfortable. They remembered the assumptions they had made. They remembered the comments they had posted. They remembered how quickly they had accepted a narrative before all the facts were available. Marcus Reed spent that week returning to ordinary life. He reopened his repair shop. He greeted customers the same way he always had. He changed oil, inspected engines, and answered questions from worried drivers. Reporters requested interviews almost every day. Most of them were politely declined. Marcus had not spent years preserving evidence because he wanted attention. He had done it because he believed that one day the truth would matter. On a quiet Friday afternoon, Emily Harper stopped by the shop. The two sat outside beneath a cloudy sky while traffic passed along the nearby road. For a few minutes neither said much. Finally Emily asked the question she had been carrying since the beginning. "When did you know this would happen?" Marcus smiled slightly. "I did not." Emily looked surprised. Marcus glanced toward the street. "I only knew that if I kept the truth, eventually the truth would keep me." Those words stayed with her long after she left. Across town, Ryan Mercer walked out of the same administration building where he had spent much of his career. The confidence that once defined him had disappeared. There were no cameras waiting. No crowds gathered outside. Only silence. The city had moved on to other stories. Yet consequences remained. Not because someone sought revenge. Not because anyone wanted humiliation. But because facts have a way of surviving long after narratives fall apart. As the sun began to set over Richmond, golden light reflected across office windows and stretched over the streets where everything had started. People hurried home carrying groceries, answering phone calls, and living ordinary lives. Most would eventually forget the details of the case. But they would remember the lesson. They would remember how easy it was to mistake confidence for truth. They would remember how quickly rumors can become beliefs. And they would remember that on a busy street corner, a man everyone assumed was hiding secrets turned out to be the one person willing to preserve the truth. Because authority can influence a story. Reputation can shape a story. Fear can silence a story. But in the end, truth writes the final chapter.